muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes a todos los amigos y amigas de la Maestría en Derecho Internacional Económico. Tenemos la suerte y el honor de tener al profesor Peter Van Den Bossche con nosotros. Va a ser un honor poder conversar con él en inglés. Luego el video también va a estar en YouTube y allí van a tener las traducciones del profesor Van Den Bossche, que muchos conocen como tal vez el padre del derecho del comercio internacional. Uh, I think you got that one. Thank you very much, Peter, to be with us. Sorry, yeah, it's true. Many of the professors in Latin America, we use your book. Then after that, you co-edited with Professor Sudok. So yeah, we sorry if you consider you as that, but we have learned, first of all, myself, a lot from your work. And that's why we're really thankful that you contribute with the Maestría en Derecho Internacional Económico tonight. How are you?
Well, Victor, thank you very much for this invitation. It's much appreciated. And thank you for your very kind words of introduction. If I may add a little commercial here, the 5th edition of the Law and Policy of the WTO, published by Cambridge University Press, is just out. Yeah, so it's on the market. I'm afraid to say that I would advise everybody to go for the e-book version, because the paper version is now 1170 pages thick. But thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Just to take advantage of your time also, the first question is, we are going to talk about the Ministerial Conference number 12 that didn't take place last weeks ago, as it was coordinated, so it was postponed. But first, because we have also many people who are not, or just starting to get related with WTO law, could you please share with us what is the Ministerial Conference and what it is important for the World Trade Organization?
Well, the Ministerial Conference is really the top organ, the top body within the hierarchy of WTO institutions. It should meet, and it often has met, every 2 years for a few days. Immediately under the Ministerial Conference, and exercising the full authority of the Ministerial Conference when the Ministerial Conference is not in session, is the General Council. And I will be referring, I think, in this short talk with you, to the General Council. So it's useful to place that. Now, at the same level of the General Council, when the General Council deals with dispute settlement matters, it's called the dispute settlement body. When the General Council deals with trade policy review matters, it's called the trade policy review body. Basically all at the same level, but under the Ministerial Conference. Ministerial Conference, as the name suggests, is composed of the ministers, cabinet rank persons, of all 164 WTO members. As I already said, they should be meeting every 2 years. There has occasionally been a gap, but MC12, as we refer to it, because it's the 12th Ministerial Conference, so one talks about MC12, should have taken place last year. Did not take place as a result of the COVID pandemic, as so many other things could not take place. Also, the Ministerial Conference could not take place, and was then postponed, and now was supposed to take place as from the 30th of November and into the first days of December. Again, postponed. And postponed sine die, so without a new date being fixed, which is perhaps something else I will come back to later. The Ministerial Conference, well, one should perhaps say that Ministerial Conference meetings are really the sort of high mass, 2-year high mass of WTO activities. They are very important because you sometimes need to have the final political decision makers coming together, shake hands, look at each other in the eyes, to come to some very difficult, politically uncomfortable for some deals. Yeah, and that is something that we are now missing because this MC12 was postponed, did not take place. So think about the Ministerial Conference as a top body composed of ministers. I remember a ministerial conference in Geneva where not just the trade ministers were present, but also presidents. President Clinton was there, Fidel Castro was there, who gave a very, very interesting speech, a very different speech from the speech that Clinton gave, but a very different. So, I mean, sometimes these ministerial conferences, certainly in the past, there have been real big media events. Well, they're always media events. Yeah, it also focuses the media attention on the WTO and what they achieve, or unfortunately, often do not achieve. Yeah. But it's useful to have every so many years this media focus also, because that also concentrates the mind of the highest political decision makers. Yeah? And that concentration on WTO matters, WTO issues, is very, very important. Because trade ministers have many, many things to do and then to decide, and then may also be often more interested these days in regional trade negotiations. So it's a very good thing that from time to time you have this ministerial conference during which they will have to focus on WTO matters.
Thank you very much. And just because of what you said, the importance of the MC12, what do you think this postponement means for the WTO and also for the multilateral trade system?
Well, the WTO didn't really have any choice but to postpone the MC12 because of the measures that the Swiss government had taken. Swiss government decided when the Omicron variant became known, and as is still the case at the moment, one doesn't not really know how serious it is, whether the vaccines really respond or address that variant. So there was a moment of panic, I think, worldwide, and to some extent that panic is still there. But the Swiss government decided that everybody coming from those countries in which that variant had already been discovered could still travel to Switzerland, but would have to go into quarantine for 10 days. I know very well because I am still a few hours in quarantine because I came back from Belgium, and Belgium was one of the countries on that list. And so on arrival in Switzerland, I had to go into a 10-day quarantine. Now, you can imagine that all the people from the European Commission could then not participate in the MC12. Yeah. But that's not to say that the problems of Southern African countries who were also on that list are any less serious. I'm not saying that, but I think without the European Union properly represented at that meeting, at the MC12, there really wasn't much. So it could not take place. I think diplomats had or in the WTO circles, the corridors of the WTO building, you had two sorts of sentiments, and often sentiments that were felt by the same people at the same time. There was, on the one hand, there was bitter disappointment, because they had been working really very hard, night-long meetings over the last couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden, and they were looking forward to see the ministers arrive and get some real dealing going on, and then no, nothing, and that just a few days before. That must have been quite a disappointment. On the other hand, and I think for some delegates, some diplomats, they had both feelings. On the other hand, it was like, oof, yeah, because we're not ready yet. Yeah? This buys us time, valuable time, to continue talking, going through the technical details, because some of the topics were really not ready yet to be decided by the highest political level. If you do that, you really have to have narrowed down the disagreements to a limited number of, very important, but a limited number of issues on which all the technical details are actually clear. Either go this way and these are the consequences and that's agreed, or you go that way and these are the consequences and that is agreed. And there were still too many of the issues on the agenda for which this was not the case. Well, perhaps if we have time for that, I'm happy to go through these issues. First, start perhaps with the multilateral negotiations. As the viewers may know, on the one hand, the MC12 would have talked about multilateral issues, meaning that all WTO members are involved in the negotiations, and plurilateral issues, meaning that only a group of WTO members, sometimes a very large group, is involved in the negotiations, but some other members are not. Starting with the multilateral negotiations, something that has gotten a lot, and deservedly so, a lot of attention, are the negotiations on fishery subsidies. Yeah? Which is it's actually a mandate given to the WTO by the United Nations. It's not something that the WTO said, "Oh, we're going to do that." No, in the context of the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, the UN has mandated the WTO to come to an agreement on fisheries subsidies. Well. There is a draft text, yeah, and I have been told that in that draft text there's still 26 pairs of bracketed text. So that means that there are multiple options, yeah, for, and this is not just slightly different formulations, but this goes to the real essence of you go that way or that way. 26 pairs of square brackets. Now the ambassador in charge of these negotiations, Santiago Wills, he was very optimistic, and still is, that an agreement is now very near. And yes, if you see how much progress has been made, yeah, then I think that optimism is justified, even though there's 26 pairs of brackets in the text. That optimism is justified, be it that, and that's what many environmentalists would tell you, be it that the fishery subsidies agreement is a whole lot less ambitious than it should perhaps be. Yeah? But you can always wish for more. Let the perfect not be the enemy of the good. Yeah. So now there are two issues which are very sensitive, which have not been decided yet, and that is the exemptions that developing countries would get. There was agreement that least developed countries would not have to worry about any of the obligations under these agreements, but developing countries in general, that was another thing. And another issue which had always been lurking in the dark, but became quite a big issue in the last couple of months, weeks, is the issue of fuel subsidies. Now, many countries, and I think also Peru, I'm not sure, but you have fuel subsidies. The government subsidizes fuel, sometimes for the whole population, but sometimes for certain sectors of your industry, the transport sector, for example, and also fisheries. Many countries have fuel subsidies for fisheries. And the question really was whether these subsidies that are either available throughout the economy or in multiple economic sectors, whether these fuel subsidies would also need to fall under the disciplines of the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement. Yeah, I mean, this is a very sensitive point, which also remained to be discussed. If we had, that goes to your question, if we had the Ministerial Conference taking place last week, I think in all likelihood, there would have been a compromise on the outstanding issues. Yeah? So there would have been an agreement. I think so. How does one now go further? Well, I mean, there continues to be pressure on ironing out the remaining differences at the technical level, at the ambassadorial level, and then hopefully, perhaps, because as I said in the very first intervention, the General Council has all the authorities of the Ministerial Council in between sessions of the Ministerial Conference. Should I say Ministerial Conference? In between sessions of the Ministerial Conference, the General Council has all the powers. So it may well be that the fishery subsidies negotiations can be concluded and the agreement adopted by the General Council before we have an opportunity to meet again. Yeah? Not very likely, because I'll say a few words about when to expect an MC12 now. I don't think it will take that long before the MC12 will take place. Yeah. So now that's fishery subsidies. The other multilateral topic is obviously what is called trade and health. Read, understand, COVID measures. And there is quite a large degree of agreement on what should be said about export restrictions, on market access, trade facilitation. I mean, they still have to iron out a number of differences, but the big problem there is the TRIPS waiver. Yeah? The waiver from the obligations to protect intellectual property rights, and in particular here patents, that some countries have insisted should be waived in the context of the COVID crisis. So that also in India and South Africa, to name now just two of the proponents of this waiver, that in these countries, the local pharmaceutical industry could copy the production of COVID vaccines. And there is no agreement on that. Would there have been an agreement if MC12 would have taken place? Perhaps. This is one of these points where then you really need to put the top politicians together in small rooms and make them come to deals. This is that has not happened, I'm not going to talk about a moratorium on customs duties on electronic transmissions. There's no agreement on that at all. And I think over the past week, the sounds that you get is that they're not even going to try. This is really for, they're not going to try to do anything before the next ministerial, which will be the postponed MC12. Now, a more positive picture you've seen with the plurilaterals. So the plurilaterals are these topics on which they negotiate with limited is relative, but not a complete membership. Last week we were all very happily surprised that an agreement was reached on domestic regulation of services. Happily surprised, but perhaps that's saying happily yes. Surprised, perhaps not, because it was already clear for some time that this was a done deal. So what the 67 WTO members that are party to this deal, they didn't have the limelight of a ministerial conference to come out and say, hey, we've got a deal. But they went ahead anyway. It was a heads of delegation meeting in Geneva, which then was able to announce the deal. Not going to go into the technical details, neither am I going into the discussion whether the WTO, whether there's place within the WTO construct, whether there's place within WTO law for such plurilateral agreements. There's a whole history of plurilateral agreements in the WTO, and certainly in the GATT. And the Tokyo Round agreements were almost all plurilateral agreements, which were then later multilateralized in the Uruguay round. So positive news on that. So apparently you didn't need a ministerial conference to get this agreement on domestic services regulation done. Similar positive news, although not that advanced, on investment facilitation for development. These were other negotiations, plurilateral negotiations that were ongoing. What is the positive news over the last week? So since the cancellation, not cancellation, postponement of the MC12, positive news is that there were an additional 8 countries, 8 WTO members that joined these consultations. And that discussions have been ongoing the last couple of days, and that the intention really is to get this agreement done, and this is quite realistic, to get this agreement done by the end of 2022. So the formal negotiations will restart in January, and then get that agreement done. A last plurilateral, there are more plurilaterals, but I'm going to limit myself to a last one, is e-commerce. In e-commerce, nobody really expected that in MC12 would deliver a deal. Yeah? There are some issues. I was participating in another webinar earlier today, and there somebody closely involved in the negotiation told me something I didn't know yet, and I'm happy to share with all of you. The expectation is that there will be like 25 parts, elements to this e-commerce agreement, as it is visualized. 8 of these 25 are now done. There's agreed text. Yeah? For example, there's agreed text on spam, something we all hate. On spam, there's agreed text on digital signatures, which I personally would really welcome. Rules and ways to facilitate use of digital signatures, and about 6 other topics. There's a deal. The only thing that one might have possibly been able to hope for in the context of an MC12 is that there would have been some early harvesting, so that on these 8 issues, or at least on the 2 that I've mentioned by name, that they would come to a formal agreement on those things already. Let's say, okay, we've got a deal on that. We sign on those issues. That, of course, didn't happen. Although most people actually predicted that it would not happen, because those that are really pushing for the e-commerce negotiations, they say that, well, if we do such early harvesting, we reduce the pressure on the really difficult issues, such as the protection of privacy, the localization requirements, the free transfer of data, cross-border transfer of data. So these issues, which are very problematic, and where you find China on one extreme, the United States on the other extreme of the negotiations, the European Union, sometimes more that side, sometimes more this side, but somewhere in the middle. So these negotiations are going to be with us for quite some time. And the fact that the MC12 did not take place has had little impact on that. I could say much more. Let me say one more thing about about the date of MC12. It was postponed without indicating a new date. There was a proposal circulated last week by Kazakhstan, who is in the chair of the Ministerial Conference, which normally means that the Ministerial Conference will take place in that country. But because of COVID reasons, they prefer to do it in Switzerland. But Kazakhstan is still the chair of the meeting. A proposal by Kazakhstan and the 3 vice chairs, Australia, Barbados, and Uganda. These are the vice chairs. The proposal from them to have the MC12 in the first week of March 2022. That proposal did not get a consensus support. South Africa, the APC country group, and the least developed country group, and India said no. So we don't have a date. The DG has herself called for the negotiations now to continue at the technical level, and to make sure that there are fully agreed texts, well, not fully agreed, but that there are text proposals by the end of February. And I have the impression that that is a message that, although members do not have to listen to the DG, but that is a message that is generally accepted. So let me stop there, because I could go on and on highlighting all sorts of, but I think, to summarize again, disappointment in one way, but I think perhaps even more relief. In some quarters, we bought ourselves a bit more time. And certainly for the plurilaterals, we've seen either an agreement concluded without a ministerial conference, or we see the discussions making further progress and soon to be continued.
Thank you very much, Professor, because it's really insightful to have all this information. I'm sorry if I change or I take the topic a little bit to Latin America. How do you see the participation of developing countries, especially maybe the Latin American ones, in the MCs and also in the WTO?
Well, I already referred to South Africa and India. And these two countries, with some support of other countries in respectively Africa and Asia, these countries have been, how to say, not very supportive of the processes taking place in the WTO. Now, I don't carry a value judgment on this. They have their own reasons for this. Perhaps I'm carrying a value judgment. And when I say, do I think that that's the right way forward? Probably not. But they, yes, I mean, as I already indicated also in the discussion of when the new, for a new date for MC12, and on almost all issues on the agenda, India and South Africa took a very critical view, or had demands that might have been maybe difficult to satisfy. With regard to the plurilaterals, India and South Africa say they have no place in the WTO. There shouldn't even be discussions on plurilaterals, let alone the results of these discussions. I definitely disagree with the first. I think the WTO is a forum for negotiations, and as long as these negotiations are open, meaning that everybody can join them, there should be no reason to seek first agreement among all members to even start talks. I don't think that's... Another thing is, of course, the results. What do you do with the results? Can results that are not at all plurilateral in nature, can they be added to the body of WTO law without a consensus of all members? We have a few plurilaterals. For example, government procurement agreement is a plurilateral, but that is a plurilateral that you find in, what is it, Annex 4 to the Marrakesh Agreement. That is a plurilateral that is there because there was a consensus to add it to the body of WTO law. Even the non-parties agreed, well, didn't object to it being added. But your question was about the role of the Latin American countries, and I think it's they have played, are playing. I wouldn't say amazingly, because that would, but a very, very positive role. If I look at some of the most critical negotiations, I already referred to the fisheries negotiations. fisheries negotiations are shared by Santiago Wills, the ambassador from Colombia, who happens to be a former student of mine, so I'm actually quite proud. So it's a very, very important, very difficult negotiation, and Colombia, in the person of its ambassador, take the lead there. Others, the investment facilitation for development negotiations, there Chile takes a leadership role. The successful negotiations on domestic regulation of domestic service, domestic regulation of services. There it was Costa Rica, that took now because it's done, that took a leadership role, and the ambassador of Costa Rica, Ambassador Gloria Abraham. She is also the chair of the negotiating group on agriculture, which is which is one of the issues I didn't mention. This is also, and this year's chair of the General Council is Ambassador Ignacio Castillo from Honduras. So Latin American is all over the place. Yeah, and I'm sure, and I apologize, I'm forgetting some people. Yeah, this is no, and they push in the right direction. Whereas we see some other developing countries stepping on the brakes, at least. Latin American countries and their ambassadors as chairs, as facilitators of these negotiations, trying to advance the multilateralism. So chapeau for Latin American.
Thank you very much. We're going to an end. I would like to make one more question. Well, also thank you for the people that are following us via Facebook. There was a question that I think Professor Van Den Bossche already answered. The question was, do you think if the fisheries negotiations, do they have a future after the suspension of the MC12, taking into account the long time of the negotiations? I think you already answered that. But I would like to take the advantage that we have you here. I know it's not related to the MC12, but it's an issue that has been there, and you have been inside of the appellate body. So I would like to ask if it's possible. Do you think how this will be solved with the appellate body? Do we see a light in the end of this small, maybe long tunnel?
Oh, Victor, this is a very, very dangerous question to ask me, because I can talk for hours on this, and we are already over time, I understand. But you're quite right to point out that it has little to do with the MC12. The dispute settlement system, the crisis of the dispute settlement system, was not on the formal agenda. It was one of these big elephants in the room, in all of the rooms, but it was not on the agenda. There was a proposal for decision at the MC12, spearheaded by European Union, but also one other country, which to my embarrassment I now cannot recollect, but a proposal to start a work program on WTO institutional reform, including so the negotiating function, yes, and then the monitoring function, but also explicitly indicating dispute settlement. That proposal, could not be discussed at the MC12 because there was no MC12, but I think it didn't even get enough support before the conference. perhaps they would have tried to table it again, and if everybody was happy, or well, actually two scenarios. The MC12 could have been a complete failure on everything else, then they might have jumped to this and have at least that decision on a work program to come to. And the work program, as that draft decision was really quite specific. It says that the talks would start that date, and then formal negotiations on that date, all with the intention to have new texts, new proposals, worked out proposals for MC13. That was the idea. To my knowledge, this was, so it wasn't even on, the appellate body crisis wasn't even on the agenda. Now let me be very, very short in what I think, and this may come as a shock to some of you. Do I envisage a reactivation of the appellate body anytime soon? No. And I'm actually not quite sure whether I hope for that. Well, yes, in my wild dreams, yes. But realistic dreams, no. Because I think that I'm afraid a bit of what the negotiators might come up with. That they might come up with a dispute settlement system that at least I would not consider to be worthwhile. Because yes, the position still taken, to the extent that it's very clear, and the position still taken by the United States, and perhaps also a few others, is so difficult to reconcile with where most other countries stand, where most other WTO members stand, that I'm afraid that if they really start negotiating and they really want to reach a deal, that what comes out, that deal is not really worth having. So perhaps we should just give it time. Yeah? And it will not be my generation anymore, but it will be your generation that will hopefully reestablish a credible dispute settlement system. Will it be a different one? Yes, and it can be a different one. I just hope it's a better one. Yeah. But what's on the table at the moment, I don't think is now. In the meantime, yeah, because there are disputes. There are actually at the moment 21 disputes pending before the appellate body. 21. Yeah. So even if you would have an appellate body re-established tomorrow, it will take a long time before they have actually gone through the backlog, which is also not really acceptable, because then all the new disputes will also be much delayed in time. That's an aspect that many people, I think, haven't really thought of. So what can we do in the meantime? So before we have a re-established appellate body, a newly appellate body, I think that the MPIA, the multi-party interim appeal mechanism that was developed under the initiative of the European Union, but has now 26 parties, and it's my understanding that Peru is one of these parties. 26 parties, and they have come to a gentleman's agreement that they will not appeal into the void. So they will not appeal panel reports to a non-active appellate body, which perhaps for some of the viewers, if you appeal a panel report to a non-active appellate body, that means that that panel report can never become legally binding. As long as the appeal process is ongoing, or at least as long as the case is before the appellate body, who isn't doing anything because it's empty, the panel report cannot become legally binding. Now, these 26 parties have promised that they will not appeal into the void, but that they will resort to a temporary alternative system which there are now 10 arbitrators appointed. There's a pool of arbitrators. In many respects, it will work like, procedurally, it will work like the appellate body. But the interesting thing is that, for me, first of all, it will allow the willing to continue to settle their disputes. And the willing, 26, you would say, well, 26 is not very much. Well, it's a misleading number, because actually it's 26 plus 27. Why 27? Member states of the European Union, which, if you look at it in the totality of the membership, 164, each of the member states of the European Union is a member. So what do you have? I'm just a lawyer, so very bad at calculus, but I think you have 53 members that are associated to the MPIA, that interim appeal system. So 53, that actually means, what is it? Almost a third of the membership. And more importantly, half of the big users of the dispute settlement system are MPIA members. China is, Brazil is, Australia is. There's still a number that are not there. The United States obviously isn't there and will never be there. But if they're willing to join, then there is almost an agreement on restarting the appellate body. But I'm hopeful that more and more countries will join, if only because quite a number said, no, we don't want to be part of that interim agreement, because if we can become part of that interim agreement, there will be no pressure anymore to resolve the crisis of the appellate body. Well, I think we've now come to the realization that that the United States will not be willing to agree to a reasonable dispute settlement system in the time to come. Anyway, I mean, they've expressed more willingness under the current administration to talk about dispute settlement than the previous administration. But trade in general, but especially dispute settlement, and even more so the appellate body, is toxic in American politics. I mean, if you want to lose the next elections and you give the Republicans this headline, so I really think they can't move anytime soon. But the MPIA is, I think, for the time to come, it is a wonderful environment for experiment. Try to do it differently than the appellate body has. So the MPIA tribunals are, again, obliged to finish their work in 90 days. Now, I wish them good luck with that. Yeah, I mean, let's see how apparently they're determined to do that. They're also going to finish their work without a secretariat. They don't have a secretarial support. There are all sorts of challenges that they will face, but they will be able to experiment with a few things. For example, perhaps another, and I've spoken about that in other contexts, and the person to read on this is Thomas Cloutier, the founding father of the WTI, my institution. He has published a very interesting article in the Journal of International Economic Law this year, to think about a different standard of appellate review. The appellate body has had a tradition and understood its task. I understood my task as having a de novo full review of the panel report. Perhaps there are standards of review that provide for more deference, perhaps. And I would be all for that if one would professionalize panels. So rather than have ad hoc panels, you have a panel body, a permanent panel body, then perhaps an appellate body may have a more differential standard of appellate review. Okay, without going into further technical details, I think I would be happy. Well, no, I'm not happy. I'm very unhappy that we are in this crisis. But given the fact that we are in the crisis, I'm not unhappy to live with the MPIA for some time to come until, and that's, again, it's not going to be my generation anymore, until the sky clears up again and there is prospect of re-establishing a dispute settlement system that I would consider worth having.
Thank you very much. We're also very happy, in our case, we're very happy that you share with us your time. Thank you very much for coming. Also, for the people that's following, Professor Van Den Bossche has already addressed the topic of TRIPS agreement, the ADPIC in Espanol. So we will have the video on Facebook and also on YouTube with subtitles. Thank you very much, Professor Van Den Bossche. I don't know if you want to say some late words for our viewers and from the people in Peru.
Well, first, again, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and thank you for all the viewers who have stayed in overtime, because I think we were supposed to be within half an hour, but as all my students know, I always go overtime. This is thank you very much.
Thank you to you for being also so giving to us. It was like a gift for us. Muchas gracias a todos y todas y manténganse en contacto. Muchas gracias, profesor Van Den Bossche. Hasta luego.